Welcome to the 5BN documentation. Successful natural ways despite cancer diagnosis, without chemotherapy and radiation, in many cases even without surgery. This documentary presents information about 15 people with conventional cancer diagnoses. These 15 people have considered and overcome their symptoms according to the model of the so-called 5 biological laws of nature, 5BL or 5BN for short. A free introduction to this model can be found in the introductory series, Disease is Different. Here is a highly simplified mini summary in about 1 minute, so that the following case reports are also comprehensible for 5BN newcomers. According to the 5BN model, almost all changes in the body that have previously been described as illnesses are part of our body's meaningfully designed adaptation mechanisms to particularly threatening or traumatic situations in our lives. They begin with the dramatically perceived situation and proceed in 2 phases. In the first conflict-active phase, either functioning is increased and cells are added, or functioning is reduced and cells are broken down, depending on the tissue. On the psychological level, we have obsessive thinking around the problem. These very specific systematic adaptations are designed to increase our chances of overcoming the serious situation as quickly as possible. Once the emotional stress has been overcome, the second conflict-resolved phase begins, in which the changes are reversed with swelling and inflammation. This means that the excess tissue that grew is now broken down, or the loss of tissue is now replenished. Psychologically, we are calm and relaxed again regarding the causal situation. Truly, the organic adaptations usually no longer provide any real survival advantage in our modern, civilized, and non-biological way of life, and can sometimes even lead to extremely problematic symptoms and even cancer diagnosis. Still, these changes are not mistakes. The body always reacts with its animalistic logic, which has been programmed for thousands or millions of years for life in and with nature. If we understand the reason behind this logic and recognize that tumor growth is not a chaotic or malignant process, strategies can be sought that make it possible to solve the actual cause and thus, in conventional terms, cure the disease. If the problem has already been solved, then only the regeneration or healing phase needs to be recognized and supported. Are there many people who know the 5BN who have taken a different path to chemotherapy, radiotherapy, or even surgery after being diagnosed with a wide variety of cancers? Yes, there are, and we want to look at various case reports. The references contain further information including the complete interviews, the entire case reports, sources, anonymized findings, etc., for further research on your own. Please also note the disclaimer at the end of the video or in the video description. So now let's look at 15 real examples of different cancer diagnoses where people took a different path. They had responsibilities of their bodies with the knowledge of the 5BN. 11 of them even have their say in interviews below. Roberto Barnay from Hungary was diagnosed with colon adenocarcinoma, i.e., malignant colon cancer, according to conventional medicine. In the animal kingdom, the digestive tract reacts to real chunks of food. For example, if you have swallowed something too big, it gets stuck in the intestines, or if something cannot be pushed along, digested, or excreted. Cell proliferation and thickening of the mucous membrane with increased secretion should enable the problematic chunk to be broken down and digested after all. We humans, on the other hand, have hardly any conflicting situations with real food, but instead with various other abstract things that we ingest in a figurative sense, things that we need, have, or want to get rid of, such as possessions, projects, money, or debts. From a biological point of view, the large intestines are hardly about getting something useful out of something, but about excreting useless leftovers or debris. The causal, stressful situation in this type of cancer is therefore always a kind of individually perceived disgusting mess, a scam, an insidiousness that you can't get rid of. In Roberto's case, such a situation occurred in his company, which subsequently, as a biologically meaningful reaction, led to a thickening of the colon mucosa, the so-called colon cancer. Once he understood the cause, he resolved the situation for himself by separating from his company so that the changes in his body were no longer necessary. The tumor subsequently regressed on its own without any external intervention. In various interviews, he talks in more detail about the background.
In 2004 arbeitete ich bei einer
In
multinationalen
2004,
Firma.
I worked for an
Und,
international
ich habe große
company and
Konflikte
suffered
erlebt,
major
nicht mit
conflicts,
meiner Firma,
not
sondern
with
mit
my
den
company,
Subunternehmen.
but with the
Und ich
subcontractors.
leidete von diesen
And I suffered from these inconveniences.
Ich
I
erlebte das
experienced
als
it
ein
as a malicious conflict,
Schmutzigkeit,
a
ein
fraud.
Betrug, ein
And then my body
Dreckkonflikt.
formed a colon
Und
thickening.
darauf bildete mein Körper ein Dickdarmverdickung.
At that time, they said it was a colon adenocarcinoma. Then I started to look for a solution to what I could do with this change.
Was kann ich mit diesen Veränderung machen? Natürlich wollte ich diese
Of course, I did not want to take up these old-fashioned methods of treatment, such as cutting it out, poisoning, burning. I was looking for natural solutions. And so I found the biological laws of nature, the so-called new medicine. I recognized it in myself, and I could understand all the processes, so I made big decisions and changed my life. I left my beloved company, and so I was now away from the conflict which downgraded it.
Meine geliebte Firma und kam so von dem Konflikt runter, schaltete
My body then switched to the conflict resolved phase, and during 8 months, my colon tumor disappeared. During this process, I observed closely that these biological laws of nature really worked. Everybody can use it, and I got it into my head to spread it in Hungary.
Und ich habe im Kopf gesetzt, dass ich es in Ungarn verbreite.
Laura Bott from Germany was diagnosed with colon cancer and metastases in the spine. After her father announced that she would receive an inheritance, which she surprisingly did not receive after a long legal battle, she developed a tumor in her colon. Shortly after the operation, which even with knowledge of the 5BN is sensible and even necessary in some cases, she refused the urgently recommended chemotherapy and radiotherapy and instead learned the 5BN. 2 years later, when a severe self-devaluation conflict went into resolution, this was diagnosed as metastases in the spine from the previous colon cancer. Since she knew that these symptoms were instead a conflict-resolved phase with a predetermined duration, she refused all treatments and gave her body the peace and quiet to allow this regeneration process to heal without external interventions. She published the book Hands Off My Life about her experiences. In 2018, Johanna from Germany was diagnosed with a colon adenocarcinoma with liver and lymph metastases. The insidiousness and the mess she couldn't get rid of was a bad domestic situation with her husband. He showed more and more interest in the female guests at her boarding house. When the situation escalated, he became even violent towards her, saying, "If you think you can run away, I guarantee you won't survive." One of the consequences of this terrible situation was the growth of the colon mucosa. After months of planning her escape, she managed to get away and go through with the divorce. Only after many more months did she feel safe enough from him to allow the adaptations to go into resolution and the tissue to break down with inflammation, swelling, and bleeding. And as a result of which she went to the doctor and was diagnosed. The course of treatment was to be chemotherapy, surgery, and further chemotherapy. However, due to the causal understanding, she refused chemotherapy, which is why she was given only 6 months' chance of survival. The operation was carried out anyway, during which it was discovered that the tumor was ulcerating, i.e., it was decomposing, as it was already in the conflict-resolved phase. In the year 2025, this topic has long been put to rest, and she has published her experience on Disease is Different, where you can read other important details of her experiences from her formative years. See the link under reference 3. József Vázsi from Hungary was diagnosed with a very aggressive bone cancer. The bones are fundamental parts of the musculoskeletal system, which is designed to ensure that we are efficient. The more we use and train individual areas, the more resistant and stronger the tissue becomes. If it is not used, it is reduced. As this is about performance, the causal, stressful situation with this type of cancer is always a very intense so-called self-devaluation conflict, i.e., I'm not good enough, I've failed, I haven't achieved anything. This type of tissue is broken down first after the causal situation, which would be diagnosed as osteolysis or osteoporosis if it was discovered. József had been in such a conflict-active phase for decades. However, due to a huge conflict at work, he managed to successfully assert himself for the first time in his life and resolved this central issue in his life. This resolved the underlying conflict, and the degraded bone was rebuilt with huge sudden swelling, inflammation, and cell proliferation, which was diagnosed as a highly malignant bone cancer due to a lack of causal understanding. After 2 to 3 years, the regeneration process was complete. Once regeneration is complete, the bone is more stable than before, which is presumably the purpose of this remodeling process. In this highly recommended lecture to friends, he reports in detail on the background and his approach with the 5BN.
Sziasztok, és a csontrákom történetét szeretném veletek
Hello,
megosztani.
I would like to share the story of my bone cancer with you, or rather with all those who have been or will be involved in this matter. I would like to tell you how I experienced it and how I survived despite all predictions and scientific prophecies.
Jóslat ellenére mégiscsak életben maradtam.
I asked for the transfer and went to Budapest. They examined me and said that it was a beautiful, very aggressive bone cancer. They asked me how long I had it, for half a year, for 1 year? I said no, only 3 months. Their eyes got wide. They'd never seen anything like it. That in just 3 months there would be such a large swelling, such a large edema, that half of the bone would disappear. They said, it must be treated urgently, according to the appropriate protocol. So chemotherapy, radiation therapy, excavation, cutting out, then cementing in. If it doesn't work, we can still cut it off.
The most important thing is to prevent the cancer from eating you up. Your life can probably be saved.
Valószínűleg így az életemet meg lehet menteni.
At that time, I was already familiar with the biological processes, but it occurred to me that those who don't know the biologica, 5BL, don't know those biological processes. They didn't know that this is a conflict-resolved phase with the current healing, which is quite painful.
I thanked them and said that I would like to stop at this point of the protocol. They said that it hadn't even started yet. He said, The point is that I want to stop here before the biopsy because I don't want you to open an artificial path for the callus fluid, as this is one of the keys to the healing processes. I do not want the callus fluid to flow into my muscles, ossify there, and stay as an osteosarcoma until the end of my life. I said I want to stop this thing here and take the process into my own hands. Inka Sattler from Germany received several cancer diagnoses, such as bone cancer. As seen in the previous case, bone cancer is caused by a severe loss of self-devaluation, in her case, by the enormous excessive demands of caring for her children due to chronic exhaustion. She describes her journey with the 5BN and her support from Dr. Hammer in her book,
Chemotherapy? No thanks.
The Miracle of My Healing from Cancer, Metastases, and Paralysis. The following is a short excerpt from her interview at the Self-Healing Conference.
I
had gone home in the meantime.
They called me at home and said,
"Come back immediately. You have bone cancer. You have to lie down. We have to treat you." This was the first time I withdrew myself, and I said, "I can lie down at home too." When we sat here on the couch where I am now, in shock, we prayed immediately, and then we called Dr. Hammer. And he miraculously answered the phone. And there again was his calming voice saying, "Mrs. Sattler, stay calm. You must lie down. Send me the pictures." He looked at the pictures and assisted me the whole time, for which I am again very grateful to him, of course.
Mich doch die ganze Zeit hindurch begleitet, wofür ich ihm nochmals sehr dankbar bin, ganz klar.
Und was war jetzt in diesem
And what
Fall
was
der
the conflict
Konflikt?
in this case?
In diesem Fall der Konflikt.
The conflict? I've already told you that I suffered from, today they call it burnout. In former times they called it CFIDS, chronic fatigue syndrome. And because of this chronic fatigue syndrome, which always overtook me during the day, I felt overwhelmed with the care of my children. During the day, I was always completely overwhelmed. It felt like I had a huge load on my back. And that is also the cause, according to German New Medicine, a collapse of self-esteem from that particular part of the body, and in this case, it was my spine.
Die Ursache laut germanische Heilkunde. Ein Selbstwerteinbruch eben von diesem betreffenden Körperteil, in diesem Fall der Wirbelsäule.
Christoph Buck from Germany was diagnosed with testicular cancer.
The causal stressful situation in this type of cancer is always a conflict of loss or fear of loss when the connective tissue of the testicles is affected. In other words, a man has usually lost a loved one, which is why this leads to a process of change in the reproductive organs as a biologically meaningful reaction. In the case of connective tissue, the adaptation of the conflict-active phase consists of tissue breakdown, just as in the case of the bones. Only when the underlying conflict has already been overcome and resolved will the tissue rebuild with swelling, pain, and inflammation, which then usually leads to the diagnosis of testicular cancer. In Christoph Buck's case, unlike Roberto Barnet's, for example, no further action was necessary to resolve the problem, as the regeneration and healing process of the adaptation had already begun, and the so-called cancer, or rather, the change within the context of the meaningful designed adaptation mechanism, was reversing by itself. He reported on his case in the well-known 5BN documentary by David Minich.
In 2009 trafen wir Christoph Buck, der einen Hodenkrebs
In
hatte.
2009, we met Christopher Buck, who had testicular cancer and got rid of it without any medical intervention. He was able to reconstruct the entire situation using the 5 biological laws of nature. He said, "I had noticed that a hardening of the testicle had developed in my right testicle, so every pair of underpants was too tight. And then I suddenly got scared. I went to see a urologist in Stuttgart. The result of the palpitation of my testicle was, of course, highly suspicious. And he did an ultrasound examination and said, "This is 95% certain to be a malignant testicular tumor. You now have cancer." And that was a shock for me. And out of the blue, I remember I had read something some months before on the internet. And the interesting thing was that this doctor, Dr. Hammer, had testicular cancer himself, because he had then discovered afterwards that testicular cancer comes from a conflict of loss. It was relatively easy for me to see that this conflict was correct in my case. The easy thing for me was that I knew the conflict immediately, that I knew that the conflict had already been resolved, and that it fit precisely to what Dr. Hammer presented as the healing process in his publications.
Mit dem, was der Dr. Hammer als Heilungsablauf eigentlich dargestellt hat in seine Publikationen.
Johannes Mant from Germany was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. The causal, stressful situation in this type of cancer is about not being able to divide or split something that is essential for survival. In the animal world, it's always about real food, yet with us humans, it is usually about annoyances that are more metaphoric, such as money or possessions that are not divided fairly, often in the context of inheritances or divorces. The cells are multiplied as part of the adaptations so that a tumor forms in order to better break down and divide the problematic chunk with more digestive enzymes. In Johannes Mant's case, the conflicting situation was a letter with his ex-wife's demands following their divorce. When he was diagnosed with cancer, he had already found a solution to the situation. He therefore decided against chemotherapy and surgery and simply made sure that the problem did not reactivate. His body removed the tumor on its own. He describes his experiences in his book, Pancreatic Cancer and How I Survived It. Here's a blurb. By profession, I am a mechanical engineer, systems analyst, and entrepreneur. As such, I am naturally looking for logically plausible and functioning answers. When I was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer in 2003, I was not satisfied with the vague, "I don't know, let's try, it could be," solutions of orthodox medicine, but I took time off work and researched full-time on the internet. There I not only came across the shameful healing successes of orthodox medicine, but also the website www.newmedicine.de, where the findings of the physician Dr. Reichgerd Hammer explained. I was immediately captivated. For the first time, the thing, which is called cancer in orthodox medicine, also made sense to my clearly structured logical mind. I consciously and consistently decided against orthodox medicine and for the healing process in the sense of the Hammer findings, and I survived. Until today, when, according to orthodox medical statistics, I should be dead with 99.9% probability. At Anne Sono's self-healing conference in 2016, he also spoke about his experiences. Nora Galafny from Hungary was diagnosed with cervical cancer. The causal, stressful situation with this type of cancer is a so-called sexual frustration conflict, such as the sudden loss of a partner or the loss of trust in the relationship with the partner. It often has to do with cheating and the like in the relationship. In Nora's case, the causal situation was when she found out that her then boyfriend had cheated on her. As a result, the tissues on the cervix were reduced, but not noticed, and sensitivity was reduced. One possible reason for this biological adaptation could be that the dilation of the cervix increases the chance of fertilization. The conflict was resolved 8 years later when her new boyfriend proposed to her, which triggered the painful symptoms of the conflict resolved phase. At the time, She was at the beginning of her first pregnancy when she was diagnosed with cervical cancer during her pregnancy checkup. The uterus and baby were to be removed. She describes her experiences in an interview with Danny Carroll, author of Terminal Cancer is a Misdiagnosis, who presents Nora's case in his online course, The BioSwitch.
Well, I was diagnosed with cervical cancer during my very first pregnancy checkup. There were 3 doctors who examined me one after the other, and all of them agreed that it was cancer.
When was this,
The
Nora?
third doctor, pardon?
When was this?
It was in 2015, in
2015.
November, in
Right,
2015.
right.
So I was diagnosed with cancer. Doctors were examining me, and the third doctor was the head of the gynecologist department in my hometown, and his other specialization was oncology as well. And he told me that I will prescribe you some tranquilizer because you won't be sleeping in the coming days. You have cancer. Your pregnancy is unimportant. Don't even think about it. You should try to find a good surgeon in the capital city of my country, in Budapest, who can help solve your problem in 2 weeks. Basically, it means that they wanted to perform hysterectomy on me, meaning they wanted to remove the uterus together with my child. And I didn't find this option very appealing, so I decided to find a cure for cervical cancer. This energy healer kept telling me that there was a connection between diseases and emotional imbalance. So she could rebalance my body's energy system with the help of her hands, but it was only a temporary solution. So if I wanted to get a permanent solution, I needed to fix my emotional imbalance. I needed to find it out what the original conflict shock of my cervical cancer was. And interestingly, I instantly knew what it was. I didn't have to think about it because it was such a big shock to me when it happened to me that it basically burned into my mind. So on the 12th of September in 2007, I found it out that my long-term boyfriend had cheated on me and had fallen in love with another woman. And it was a huge shock to me because he was my best friend. And I was 100% sure that he was going to be the father of my children. So when I realized that our perfect relationship was just an illusion, it took me a very, very long time to get over this shock. And well, so I understood that this was, or I was pretty sure that this was the original cause of my cervical cancer. But first, I didn't understand why I was diagnosed with cervical cancer only 8 years later in 2015. So why did it take for my cancer so long to develop? It just didn't make any sense to me. Then later, my energy healer sent me a YouTube video about Dr. Hamer's scientific discoveries. And this was when I learned about the 5 biological laws. So I dived deep into this knowledge. And after learning about the basics, I looked up the disease chart, the disease chart to see what Dr. Hamer said about cervical cancer. And what I found there was so astonishingly accurate that it was a life-changing moment for me, because all of a sudden everything made perfect sense to me. So according to Dr. Hamer, the biological conflict related to the cervix is a sexual or mating conflict, which means that mating is at stake. A typical example for that is when the individual finds it out that the partner has cheated on her. And this is exactly what happened to me. So during the conflict active phase, I didn't experience any symptoms. I didn't even know that I had cervix. I had no bleeding, no pain, nothing at all.
Right.
the first symptoms appear only after the resolution of the conflict. So when you resolve your conflict, according to Dr. Hammer, the brain sends another signal to the cervix to replenish the cells. And this is when the tumor or the growth start growing, and it is actually a so-called healing tumor. It is unharmful, and this is what conventional medicine diagnoses as cervical cancer.
That's
and
right.
It is when the bleeding appears.
That's right.
So what happened to me in 2015? How did I resolve my conflict? On the 14th of June in 2015, I was celebrating my birthday. And when I got my birthday cake, I spotted an engagement ring on the top of it. It's actually here. I can show it to you.
Nice.
This is the ring.
Very pretty.
And I got it from my new boyfriend. And it came to me as a complete surprise because he had always been against marriage and weddings. And I just accepted it. Okay, I will never get married. But when I got this ring out of the blue, it was a complete shock to me. And I started experiencing the first symptoms, so irregular bleeding, sometime after our engagement. And by the way, this ring meant a lot to me because it was solid proof that my boyfriend wanted to start a family with me. So he was serious about our relationship. And I gave birth to my son in 2016, in July, through a healthy cervix. So basically, this is my story.
Sorry, it just gave me goosebumps. So you found Dr. Hammer after you had actually resolved the issue with the cervix. How did it change your view of the process?
It's just changed my whole life. Okay. So when I realized that all of a sudden everything made perfect sense to me, and I could understand why I had cervical cancer. It was so clear, unlike the official explanation of cervical cancer, which I never understood. It is caused by HPV, but not for everyone. So I don't know, it was confusing. The official explanation has always been confusing for me. Right, but Dr. Hammer's explanation made perfect sense to me. It was shockingly logical to me. And since then, I view diseases, or let's call them biological programs, differently. And I always try to find it out what is the original conflict shock of that certain disease or biological program. So yes, it changed, right? My life. It changed my life forever. I'm so happy. I'm so happy that this happened to me. Really, I mean it.
When you look back on it, the learning is extraordinary, right? And it turns out to be the greatest blessing you've ever had, right? I mean, who could ever imagine?
It was.
That's the best blessing I've ever had, right?
Strangely enough, it was. It was. Yes.
Well, Nora, I'm number one delighted that you've gone through and you delivered a beautiful, healthy baby when they were trying to give you a hysterectomy and remove it. I mean, it's just it's an extraordinary story. I'm delighted that you managed to find Dr. Hammer and now view what we know as disease through a completely different filter. It's just life transforming, or it has been for me at least. And thank you so much for sharing your story with the viewers of this course.
Gloria from Germany was also diagnosed with cervical cancer. She gave an interview with the physician Dr. Teresa Schwartzberg about her experiences with the 5BN on the ORF2 program Vera in 2002. In my case, too, the diagnosis was a very brutal and insensitive one. I was told at the time that if I did not undergo surgery immediately, I would still have a remaining life expectancy of about 1.5 to 3 years. That varied from doctor to doctor. And both doctors said it so brutally? Yes. And didn't that intimidate you? It maybe caused a kind of defiant reaction? Yes, I first went to various alternative doctors who unfortunately confirmed the same thing to me, that I could not get well without an operation. And then I heard about Dr. Hammer and decided to consult him. And he said to me, "This cancer is already in the healing phase because the conflict that led to this cancer has already been solved." A few months later, you went to a third doctor and wanted to do another biopsy, another tissue biopsy. What did he find then? Yes, he had known what the findings looked like a few months before, and he was very angry and said, "For God's sake, you stay right here. We'll operate immediately." No, I said, "First of all, look, examine me." He could not believe it. So you didn't carry out anything from Orthodox medicine? Nothing. Nothing? No medication either? Nothing. And Dr. Hammer was right. I was also, from the Orthodox point of view, healthy. I waited these months of healing. No more cancer cells were found. And that was 13 years ago. Andrea Lang from Germany was diagnosed with ductal breast cancer. The causal stressful situation with this type of cancer is a contact break-off or separation conflict, which does not affect the mammary glands, but the milk ducts. In other words, when the woman feels as if someone is ripped from her breast. However, there is also the reverse case, where you feel that you no longer want someone at your breast, i.e., an unwanted contact that you want to get rid of. In her interview, Andrea describes just such a dramatic separation within the family, thereby both variants are conceivable in her description, that on the one hand, she could no longer tolerate the contact, but on the other hand, she also missed the right kind of contact. The adaptation here is a symptomless reduction in the lining of the milk ducts. After resolution of the conflict, which in her case was probably the successful termination of the unwanted contact, this is reversed by swelling, inflammation, and pain, which is often the time of diagnosis. After she was able to understand the cause and progression, she canceled the upcoming surgery, chemotherapy, and radiation. 6 years after her diagnosis, she spoke at the Self-Healing Conference about her 5BN journey without surgery, chemotherapy, or radiation. I was at the annual cancer screening, which I went to at the time. It was confirmed it was malignant breast cancer according to conventional medicine, and it was also clear quite quickly that a mastectomy, a complete breast removal, should take place because there were several foci. For me, it was basically clear from the beginning, well, you might survive it for 1 to 2 years, but that was it. At the preliminary examination, that was 3 days before the operation, in between there was a public holiday. I was then told that I would probably need chemo and also radiation. Yes, that was the situation back then. On January 7th, my surgery should take place early in the morning at 7 a.m. On January 6th, it's the public holiday in Baden-Württemberg. And on January 5th, in the evening at 9 p.m., I received an email from the mother of a friend of mine, and she told me about the new medicine. And then we did some research on the internet, and it hit me. I read it and immediately knew that there was something in it. It did something to me within minutes. I got psychologically better pretty quickly because I had hope to take a different path that might be life-sustaining. And everything I read sounded very plausible. And of course, I continued to research because for me, that was important to do. I did not only deal with it for interest. For me, it was hop or top. Is this the right way for me or not? I did not have the surgery, and I have never been in the hospital or with another conventional doctor since then, except this doctor who knows the new medicine. So I never had any physical limitations during the whole time. It has now been over for 6 years. I have never felt bad.
Die neue Medizin kennt. Also ich hatte die ganze Zeit über, sind ja jetzt über 6 Jahre, nie irgendwelche körperlichen Einschränkungen. Mir ging es nie schlecht.
Yara Kaiser from Israel was also diagnosed with ductal breast cancer, i.e., affecting the milk ducts, in 2017. The cause was that she had not wanted contact with her husband for a few years. It was only after she left the house and got divorced, which were the actions she took to resolve the conflict, that the symptoms of the milk ducts started, and she was diagnosed with cancer. The tumor shrank, and only a residual condition remained, which did not change from then on. Almost 5 years later, in 2022, she reported in detail on her experiences and the methods she used in an interview with Giran Kinar, a 5BN user from Israel. It was recorded for World GNM Day, a kind of international GNM or 5BN Congress organized by the Indian Association around this medical model.
About 4.5 years ago, the first thing that happened is that I decided to change my life and get divorced. We decided it together. It was kind of a good process, but it's always challenging to spread the family and get separated. So I did that and left home. And 4 months later, I was diagnosed with breast cancer, with milk duct breast cancer. What happened is that as soon as they diagnosed it, I had a feeling. It was a feeling, but it was more like in knowing that I was going to do it to heal myself differently. So what happened is that after 2 weeks or so, a very good friend of mine sent me a link to an article about the breast cancer according to the German New Medicine. And I was reading it and I was like, whoa, did someone write a book about me? It was like so obvious, you know, right-handed.
It was your life at the time.
What?
It was your life at the time.
Yeah, it was exactly my life at the time. So I was I identified myself in this article very clearly. So Idan, our colleague, wrote this article, and I called him and I said, well, you wrote in words what each cell of my body knows. So I want to meet you. And this is how it started. I met Idan and I studied the entire knowledge of the GNM from him at that time, like 4 years ago.
Or did you do anything with regular medicine? Any treatment also? And if you didn't, what was the reaction that you have received from your physicians?
Okay, this is a good question and interesting to tell. The doctors told me that I had breast cancer, and I told them that I want to start with a natural process and not going straight forward to what they suggested, chemotherapy or hormones to shrink the tumor, and then operation to take it out. And I felt like, well, I don't feel comfortable about it. And I want to try something else and see how it goes. And the reaction was that the doctor told me, well, I've seen some, not many, but some girls like you, and they ended up with tumors all around and even died from it. So I went to a second opinion for a known professor in Israel, and he actually said to me that if He didn't want to escort me in a natural process. And he said, if you're going to leave in 3 months from now, then come back and we can tell the story and so on. So I understood he gave me around 3 months to leave, you know. It's not that I did it because I'm very brave or so, but because I had, let's say I had 2 books. One saying this should be scary and I can die from it and so on. And the other one says, you're in the healing process and everything is going to be okay and this and this and this is going to happen to you, and it happened. So I just chose this book, you know.
What made you choose the GNM book over the other book that is much more prevalent and popular? Why did you choose it?
I think I chose the GNM book, so-called, because it was more logical to me. It had answers to the process that I'm going through, real answers, not thoughts, statistics, real answers about the process that I was living in. It was kind of about me.
How was the healing process going for you?
Yes, so after 1 year, I got the tumor got shrinked in by third, and then it stayed there. And there was a time after a few months or so that I decided that I was doing ultrasound every few months. And after a few times like that, I said to myself, well, this is not changing, not growing, not shrinking, so it cannot even be called cancer, because cancer should grow, should do something, you know. So it's kind of like, I felt it was like a scar or something, you know, that is out there, but it's not doing, is in there, but it's not doing anything. And I felt great.
Bridget Henseler had already been diagnosed twice with breast cancer and a brain tumor before she got to know the 5BN. She used this knowledge to reanalyze and understand the causes of the previous diagnosis and symptoms, and overcame a third breast cancer diagnosis, this time affecting the milk ducts, with the causal understanding provided by the 5BN and the new options for action derived from it. Her most dramatic separation situation was when she found her father dead on the garage floor. Here's what she said. Yes, there the 5 laws of nature were explained, and that was the purest revelation for me. That was, oh yes, only in this way our body can function. Sure, it's all logical, it's biological, that's how it has to be. Yes, and then came 2004. I couldn't bear to see him lying there on the cold garage floor. It was February 4th. It was cold. I carried him into the living room with my niece, and it was just, yes, it must not be. That was on February 4th, and on March 23rd. I know that because it would have been my father's birthday on March 24th. On March 23rd, I was standing in the shower, and I noticed I have a node on my right breast. Then on September 27th, there was education again, and then he asked me, have you had a burning sensation in your breast lately and itching? So I said, yes, and thought, oh God, it's not gone now after all. And then Mr. Moore said, wonderful, really great, because those are the healing signs in the milk ducts that it itches. And this burning, that really goes through the breast ducts, that's when it heals. When a wound that you have on your skin heals, it also itches and sometimes burns. And that's how it is internally. Yes, and from the brain CT, it was also through. So half a year, and then it was through. And there it was again. When she wanted the orthodox medical diagnosis, then she went to her family doctor. and said, I want a cranial CT. And she said to me, you have breast cancer. What do you want with a brain CT? Then I said, yes, I want to know where I stand. Yes, but what do you want a brain CT for? Well, I won't fool you. You know that I work with the new medicine, and I will treat it with the new medicine. Patty Holden from the USA also developed a ductal breast tumor at the end of 2018. Just over a year earlier, she learned by phone that her beloved father had died in a tragic car accident. She experienced this terrible event where her father was torn from her breast as a massive separation conflict concerning the milk ducts. From then on, she could hardly sleep for many, many months, constantly thinking about it, dreaming about it, and unable to come to terms with the incident. A year after the accident, she forced herself to work on her emotional healing, as she had already met the 5BN shortly before and knew that she had been in the conflict-active phase of one or more adjustment processes for far too long. This is because the longer and more intense the conflict-active phase lasts, the greater the adjustments, and the longer, more painful, and more intense the symptoms become in the conflict-resolved phase. After 3 therapeutic rebirthing sessions, she was finally able to sleep through the night again, and a short time later, she felt a lump forming in her breast as part of the beginning of the conflict-resolved phase. This grew larger and larger over the next 5 months, until it was about the size of a walnut. She got through the entire, sometimes painful, regeneration process without any conventional medical support and with only a few alternative medical and various nutritional methods. She describes her experiences in 2 interviews with the American 5BN user and trainer Melissa Sell. The first took place during the regeneration process, the second 2 years later after full regeneration.
My father died in October of 2017, so basically 16 months ago around. Up until then, I was, and even after that, I was doing so many things for my health. Diet change, detoxification, all kinds of ways of detoxification. And right before he died, I had just recently found out about German New Medicine, which was kind of ironic. And that's what helped get me through most of my experience over the last, since he passed away. He died in a car accident overnight, and we can talk about that in a minute.
Like when you were conflict active and you realized I'm not sleeping, could you share with us a little bit about that process and how long that took?
I knew I was in conflict active because I was waking up around 4 o'clock in the morning every single night, already crying from waking up from the dream of that phone call. So that phone call just kept waking me up in the morning. And this went on, for probably 6 months after the car accident. I needed to get over this as quickly as I could. So I did 3 rebirthing sessions in a 1-week period on a Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And all 3 sessions brought up emotional traumas from the past. And it was about 2 weeks after those 3 rebirthing exercises that I started to notice a small lump on the right breast. Now this thing kept getting gradually getting larger throughout the fall. Anyways, I'm going throughout the fall and I'm doing some food protocols, but I'm not doing it very seriously. But as this thing gets larger and larger, I start taking it more seriously. But because I watched your video during that phase a few times, and it was because I kept, everything you said should happen did happen. And so I felt, even though it was so painful, I actually felt like I was going through a healing crisis and that I was not dying. And I was doing coffee enemas every night that I couldn't handle the pain, and that helped. I was doing lots of turmeric and curcumin. So it's been a lot of work on making myself relax too. It was not easy to believe I was getting better, but that was what I chose to believe. And you were right in one of your videos about the breast cancer, that right before the lump starts or before the problem starts, you feel the best you've ever felt. And I did, because that was right after the rebirth. And I felt like, oh, I got to stop being so angry. So I was like on my way to feeling great. And then all of a sudden, all this tumor stuff starts. And it was because of German New Medicine that I was able to basically be painfully comfortable through the whole process.
Thank you so much for sharing your story, because I think it's going to give so many people so much just like, that relax, that relief of, she followed this path. That means that I could do it too. Not that I have to, not that I must, not that I'm obligated, but it is possible. Awesome. Thank you so much again, Patty.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to this. I'm so excited for this video. It was about 2 years ago now that Patty and I did an interview video with her experience with a breast lump. Patty went a different route. And so we want to hear an update on what's going on with your health, your life, and the lump in your breast. So please fill us in.
I'm actually probably at this point in the best health that I've ever been in my life. In January, for the last 2 years, it's been extremely itchy, and it does create a rash right over the surface of that on the skin. But as of right now, that has all cleared up again after the second year. And there's no scar tissue. The skin looks brand new. Like I actually look better than I did before this all started. So I remember before the tumor actually was noticeable, that breast did appear smaller than the other one. So I actually felt kind of like I was uneven. Mm-hmm. But that has cleared up also. Like it's like nothing ever happened. So I don't know how to explain it other than nature did exactly what it knows how to do.
Oh, that is beautiful. And I just love that you are just this walking, talking testimonial for the fact that the body does know what to do. And so, the idea that cancer is this bad thing or this wrong thing or this thing that forms when you're, because you're not taking care of yourself, or it's like a punishment, that model doesn't make any sense when you really understand and you see people's stories of, healthy nutrition, all of the things, yet you had an emotional shock and your body adapted to that. And so understanding and trusting that deep wisdom that the body built it because of an adaptation, but it also knows how to restore. And so seeing the other half of that story and seeing you here, healthy, vibrant, strong, just looking fabulous, you are just incredible. And so thank you so much for taking the time to share this.
Ms. N from Germany was diagnosed with breast cancer of the mammary glands at the end of 2023. The mammary glands are always the result of a so-called nest worry conflict, i.e., a person is very worried about a close person, animal, or their own living space. In the conflict active phase, the glandular tissue is increased so that a tumor forms in order to biologically provide more milk to better supply the affected person in need. After the situation has resolved, the tumor is broken down with swelling and inflammation in the presence of appropriate microbes. In Mrs. N's case, the cause was a dramatic care conflict about her daughter, which caught her off guard. As part of the change, one lump formed in the left breast and 2 in the right breast. When the examination took place a few weeks later, the lumps on the right had already disappeared, so her body was able to break down these smaller lumps itself. But after the biopsy, the left lump led to the corresponding carcinoma diagnosis with recommended treatment: chemotherapy, surgery, radiotherapy, further chemotherapy. If she didn't do it, she would be dead in 2 years, according to the doctor at the breast center. After taking her time to gather information and listen to different perspectives, she decided not to wait for the body's own regeneration process, which is a very symptomatic and potentially fraught with complications, but to have an operation instead due to the size of the remaining lump. Although this was a major deviation from the guidelines, the operation was carried out and the pathologist confirmed that the tumor was reducing. Marja Neuveld from Switzerland and the Netherlands was diagnosed with superficial basal cell carcinoma on her right breast, i.e., skin cancer. The epidermis, which is partly responsible for sensing physical contact, reacts to a so-called separation conflict or loss of conflict with cell reduction and changes in sensitivity. In her case, the shocking event was when, after an extremely exhausting month-long bike tour at the beginning of 2020, all she wanted to do was hug her father in great anticipation, who was waiting for her at her destination. But then she was suddenly told that they had to keep their distance because of the coronavirus, which meant she was not allowed to have the contact with him that she had longed for so much, which left her stunned and shocked. The resolution probably came 2 years later, when the government's coercive measures were finally over and she had to suffer from a long-lasting open wound as part of her regeneration. Here is an excerpt from her experience report.
My
example is the diagnosis of basal cell carcinoma on the inside of my right breast. I am right-handed, and the trigger was, in 2020, I cycled from the source of the Rhine in Switzerland to the mouth of the Rhine in Rotterdam in the Netherlands. And it was 2020, Corona time. And I lived in my bubble for 30 days in my perfect world.
Meine heile Welt. Und ich wollte nur noch, weil ich war echt.
Because I was really fed up, I just wanted to be in my father's arms, to be comforted. And what happened? Stop, 1.5 meters away, and I was in shock. I was standing there with my bike, my luggage in the pouring rain, and I was in shock. And at that moment, I developed an abnormality on my breast, and it wasn't really unusual for 2 years. So I wasn't scared at all, not in the whole process. It was reddish, with scabs on it, it itched from time to time, it changed shape, but it was nothing special. The 3rd year, however, it changed and formed a crater. It was an open wound for a year, and I still didn't have the impulse to do anything. I already knew the biological laws of nature. I wasn't afraid.
Es war eine offene Wunde, ein Jahr lang, und ich hatte immer noch nicht den Impuls, irgendetwas zu machen. Ich kannte schon die biologischen Naturgesetze, ich hatte keine Angst.
And then it went to the 4th year, where it developed into a superficial lump of about 1.5 centimeters, and it was also open. So it was an open wound, and it was very inconvenient in everyday life. But I found it remarkable that thanks to the biological laws of nature, I still had no fear. And what did I do then? The 4th year went by, and I still had no impulse. And now all that's really left is like scar tissue. And the doctor really wanted to cut it all away, but I didn't do it because I wanted my body to be able to do it itself somehow, only with the help of some black ointment.
Das nur mit Hilfe von der schwarzen Salbe das selber irgendwie machen kann.
Inka Sattler's bone cancer diagnosis has already been highlighted in the documentary. She was also diagnosed with skin cancer when she developed 2 melanomas on her breast. The causal stressful situation in skin cancer of the deeper dermis is always a so-called attack or defilement conflict, i.e., we feel attacked or defiled at the affected area. The adaptive reaction of our biology is a thickening of the dermis so that we are better protected from the attacks or defilements, which is often diagnosed as melanoma. In Marja's previous case, she presumably reacted to the open wound with a localized defilement conflict and additionally activated a dermal process. In Inka's case, 2 doctors pointed to her breast and because she had also been diagnosed with breast cancer, said, "The breast must be removed," which she perceived as an attack, and as a result, 2 melanomas formed on this breast. Here is an excerpt from her interview in the Self-Healing Conference.
Also du hattest Brustkrebs, die Knoten hatten sich zurückgebildet.
So you had breast cancer and the lumps had receded. They were still there, but you could live with them, and you could understand why they were there. But then it got much worse. What else happened then?
Ich bekam ja dann auf diese Brust, auf die
I then also
betroffene
got
Brust,
2 cherry-stoned melanomas on top of the existing lumps in this affected breast. Dr. Hammer was again the one who told me what to do, and we figured it out together. It was very, very impressive. Maybe I can tell you about it briefly. The doctors said, "The breast has to be removed." 2 doctors saying things against my will. I didn't want any of that. And I got exactly 2 melanomas. And Dr. Hammer says that the melanomas are formed during attack conflicts. The body creates a barrier here as a protection. So once again, a meaningful biological special program, and no cancer, nothing that got out of control. In his literature, The Discoverer of the 5BN, Dr. Hammer describes many other successful cancer patient cases. These can also be found in many other books about the 5BN. Unfortunately, in almost all cases, those affected were massively attacked or even defamed for their decision by the doctors looking after them and their personal environment. As a result, almost everyone has kept a very low profile with their decision. As a result, possible successes of the 5BN model in treating cancer and various other diseases has hardly been made public. There are also various reports of people with typical cancer symptoms who never went to the doctor, e.g., because they knew the cause according to the 5BN and did not want or need conventional medical treatment and pressure. These cases also go unreported. And finally, many people no longer go to their treating doctor after the initial cancer diagnosis once they have decided to take the 5BN route, as they are usually massively attacked for this and punished, for example, with weeks of telephone harassment. These possibly successful natural cures are usually not even known to the doctors. It would be more than desirable for conventional medicine to pay attention to the findings from this model and provide professional support for patients who wish to follow this path in the future. 1,000 thanks to the people who have taken this path of taking their own responsibility and were even prepared to courageously share their experiences with others. If you have walked this path yourself and are willing to share your experiences in a similar way, for example, in future videos, please get in touch with us. Thank you for listening, and all the best for your own journey.